Now, months have passed, and as a result, there's much to discuss. Are you ready for this?
Well, there are rising concerns of a potential coronavirus pandemic after a major jump in cases outside of China.
China remains the epicenter, with millions forcibly confined to their home, yet the virus still spreads. 30 countries and territories, nearly 80,000 cases.
Now, yes, it has been confirmed that the coronavirus originated in China, specifically Wuhan. But there are some notable anecdotes.
The coronavirus is looking more and more like a global pandemic, spreading far beyond mainland China. In Italy, a few cases this weekend ballooned today to over 200. At least 7 dead. In Iran, 12 dead so far. The government is racing to increase production of surgical masks. In South Korea, more than 800 now infected.
So the footage I'm using is from a compilation that I made myself using NBC News nightly broadcast, because I feel like they're fairly unbiased and they like to keep bipartisan shit and politics out of it. They kind of just cover the news, which is what I like from my news. So that being said, the video that you're watching, in correlation to my notable anecdotes, is covering the months of February and March. Now, only a little bit of February, despite the fact that coronavirus had been detected possibly as early as November. It's weird and surreal and frightening and a lot of emotions when you watch early coverage of the coronavirus. They had no idea what was coming, what we were in store for, and what we have yet to face. Especially now with all the protests going on, people have completely forgotten about the coronavirus and how serious it really is. And social distancing is no longer a thing because the protests have superseded, the emotions of the protest have superseded the importance of social distancing, and as my wise uncle calls it, social differencing. And couple that with the fact that Trump supporters, majority of Trump supporters, think it's a joke to wear a mask and to social distance. And you go into a store with a mask and you see one of these people, you can just tell by looking at them, you know, that they're judging you and probably angry at you for what? Trying to stay healthy? So yeah, this is going to be a strange video to watch and react to, considering how far we've come since the beginning of this pandemic and how far we have yet to go.
So far, health experts say the risk in the U.S. is low, only 57 known cases. The concern, with a 2% mortality rate at the epicenter in China, the coronavirus is far deadlier than the seasonal flu. Despite the CDC's warnings, President Trump in India today downplayed the risk.
You may ask about the coronavirus, which is very well under control in our country.
Meanwhile, the Trump team insists the economic fallout should be minimal.
We have contained this, I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight.
In Europe, Italy is the hardest hit, at least 10 deaths. The virus has now spread to the south of Italy as well.
It's not necessarily that more people are getting sick overnight. It's that authorities are testing more people.
We're very, very ready for this, for anything, whether it's going to be a breakout of larger proportions or whether or not we're at that very low level. And we want to keep it that way.
The FDA says there is no shortage of masks, of gowns, of gloves right now. It has 30 million stockpiled, but if there were a true pandemic, it might need 10 times that many.
Dramatic drop, nearly 1,200 points, the most ever in a single day for the Dow, in coronavirus crash mode, on pace for its worst week since 2008.
So a lot of information to unpack there. A lot of anecdotes to be made. For one, the toddler-in-chief, Trump, from early on, just denied it, called it a hoax. At one point, think he said that it was a hoax created by Democrats to hurt his re-election in 2020. So there's that we're battling against at the same time as having a brain-dead moron as a president. I did say earlier that I like my news not to be political, but I am very political, and Trump is very stupid, and I'm going to repeat that many times throughout this video. Now, some of the things they had mentioned was, I mean, look at Italy. It said, what, 10 deaths or something like that? If you followed the coronavirus and the way it rampaged the world, you would know that Italy was the hardest hit with thousands and thousands of deaths. I mean, thousands a day. Overnight, people were dying by the thousands. The Dow plummeting its worst since 2008, which, if you've been following, you will know that it's going to get much worse, and pretty much Depression-era style economics are going to be coming into play here in the next month, after February and March. And a lot of denial from the Trump team. And you can see a little bit of battling between themselves on the surface. At the press conference, you saw conflicting views. Makes me wonder what was going on behind the scenes. Trump would not be an easy person to tell to that he's wrong, which I think is part of the reason we had such a bad response to the coronavirus pandemic, because Trump wouldn't take it seriously, and everyone was afraid to tell him, like, dude, you're fucking stupid. You need to do something immediately. So yeah, we're still in the early stages of this video, and the coronavirus is an infant. It's in its infancy. It's in its infancy. So get ready. It's about to get a lot worse.
But the virus, we're doing a very professional job. The risk to the American people remains very low.
The degree of risk has the potential to change quickly.
We do expect more cases.
It may get a little bigger, it may not get bigger at all. We'll see what happens.
Tonight, the virus has spread from China to 47 countries. Asia, the Middle East, Europe, North and South America, all affected.
Well, I think it's just people don't know. It's the unknown. I think they're not very happy with the Democrat candidates when they see them. I think that has an impact.
The Trump administration has shown towering and dangerous incompetence when it comes to the coronavirus.
He shouldn't be making statements like that because it's so bad for the country. And Nancy Pelosi, I mean, she should go back to her district and clean it up.
The reason you're saying so much attention to it today is that they think this is going to be what brings down the president.
Current recommendation is if you are sick, particularly if you think that you may have a severe respiratory viral infection, wearing a mask can help prevent spreading that virus to other people.
But if you don't want to get it from the guy in the airport next to you, is it worthwhile?
It doesn't seem to be.
Trump wants to blame the stock market crashing on people's displeasure with Democratic presidential candidates, which is funny considering Bernie Sanders was probably one of the most popular candidates we've ever had. Unfortunately, he was just popular amongst people who have been disenfranchised against voting. So that's, and people would say, well, if he's so popular, why didn't he win? Well, my generation and the generations younger than I are stupid and lazy, and not stupid, lazy, just lazy. And like I said, they've been disenfranchised to believe that their vote doesn't matter. And if everyone thinks their vote doesn't matter, well, guess what? Voting doesn't matter. It's perpetual. And then McConnell saying that Trump's incompetent. Now, I know Trump has a very sensitive ego. He's a very fragile, elderly person. But how is it not incompetence? I mean, is he really that blind or arrogant to his own faults? Does he really think he's doing a good job? See, I happen to think that Trump knows he's doing a shitty job, but it's his personal agenda that makes him not care. He's in it to get tax cuts for his friends and pocket money from potential side deals and stuff like that. He's not in it to help America. So he is, by default, incompetent because of his personal agenda.
And then another frightening thing is it's talking about masks. Masks are basically only good to protect others. It's not so much good for protecting yourself, which is especially terrifying considering the fact that with the George Floyd protest, that all these people who are wearing their masks think that they're immune to catching the coronavirus, when in reality, you're protecting other people by wearing your mask. You're containing your own illness when you wear a mask. You're not necessarily protecting yourself from catching the illness. And that's a really big misconception that I think a lot of people in this country have. They think that by wearing a mask that they're suddenly immune. And it's ridiculous. And it's a narrative that keeps getting propagated and pushed and pushed. Yeah, it's a bad situation all the way around, and as you see, cases in Italy and the U.S. are constantly rising throughout this video, and by the end, it's going to be in the thousands. Like I said, it's a terrifying prospect to watch it unfold as quickly as this video allows it to do.
After the first death was reported in this country this weekend.
Sure. The nation's top infectious disease official telling NBC News today the virus has reached outbreak proportions.
Across the country, over 100 confirmed cases in more than a dozen states.
This is New York. We're a gateway to the world. You see all these cases around the world, around the country. Of course, we're going to have it here.
If it went from 2% to 1%, you were still 10 times more lethal than the standard influenza that we get on a seasonal basis.
There are people who are shrugging this off, saying, it's just like the flu.
It's not, because it's brand new. When you have a brand new virus in which no one has had any experience before, that gives the virus kind of an open roadway to spread.
Well, the president is downplaying. He is downplaying the threat of the coronavirus to a dangerous degree.
Across the country, sporadic reports tonight of store shelves emptied out as Americans stock up to hunker down.
There are now more than 220 cases across the country.
As the number of cases grows, there's a new warning tonight. The U.S. does not have enough coronavirus test kits to meet the current demand.
Don't have enough tests today to meet what we anticipate will be the demand going forward.
A lot of people don't report because they get the coronavirus and they get better relatively quickly. Not that severe. Some of them go to work, but they get better.
House Trump tweeting today he never said people that are feeling sick should go to work, calling it disinformation put out by the Democrats. On some of the stats, he says he's going with his gut.
Now, this is just my hunch.
The reality is, his own experts say in the midst of a public health crisis, facts matter.
We make policy recommendations and analysis of what we're going to recommend based on accumulation of data. Data is very important.
Every time I pause this video, it gets overwhelming because I have to cover 10 topics in the span of about a minute. Part of that's due to the way I edited the video to include just the important bits. So in this segment right here, we see Cuomo, my boy Cuomo. One of his first appearances in the wake of coronavirus, talking about New York being a gateway, which makes a lot of sense. It's spread through human contact, and New York is basically the travel center of the United States. Massive crowds. Yeah, that's part of the reason we saw New York become such the epicenter of new cases and deaths in this country. And yeah, Cuomo was right, and like usual, he was right, and it certainly got a lot worse very quickly. And then we saw Fauci talking about the flu, how people are comparing the coronavirus to the flu, and Fauci's like, nah, you can't do that. You can't do that because the flu is something we've known about and been studying for a long time. We have labs, kind of like the Wuhan lab, right, where they study viruses and bacteria and things like that, and they put them in petri dishes and they watch the evolution of viruses, because viruses have a very short lifespan, as well as bacteria and other germs and things like that, that they can essentially watch how the virus will react to certain stimuli or certain antibodies or things like that very quickly, and they can collect a lot of data over the course of a few years. Now with the flu, we've had it for so long that we've even been able to develop vaccines. We can predict when it's going to get worse, and we know what elements can make the flu more severe or less severe because we know a lot about it. COVID, we know nothing. It's new. So, and the more we learn, and the more I pause this video, the more you'll find out that it's pandemic panic. Everything that could be wrong and bad about this virus is coming to light. So yeah, that's a serious issue there. People thinking that it's not that serious. Testing demands. Now, fast forward a couple months to where we are now. We know that testing was in high demand, but very, very low quantities were being issued. Trump at one point even turned down testings, I think from the World Health Organization. A couple million tests or something like that. Maybe it was less. Notable anecdotal, people. But yeah, testing, that was part of Trump's ineptness, was the fact that he tested like 1% of 1% of the population when it was needed to be vastly larger than that. And he dropped the ball, so to speak. Very, very, very badly. Bigly, he dropped that ball. And then, you know, him saying the thing about going back to work, he wasn't suggesting people go back to work. That is where politics kind of comes into play, where people will say, well, he said this. He didn't technically say it. He was saying that people were going back to work, which is, it's his way of inferring or telling people to go back to work without actually doing that. And you saw his follow-up tweet where he was saying, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. No, you hinted at it. You hinted at it without saying it. And that's what you do. You throw a million fishing lines out into the water and you hope to catch one fish. Despite the fact that you threw 50 lines out there, you might pull in one or two. And most of the time, your ideas are so bad that your lines break. You know, you snag it on some algae, or you don't pull in no fish. You're not pulling in any fish, bro. Yeah, he does that where he'll say something and then lie and then deflect. And quite often he'll say something and then the next day say, no, I said the opposite. And it's not that he's good at lying. He's just very experienced at it. So he can do it without flinching. He is the master manipulator, Trump. He really is. And going with his gut and hunches, you know, that's not what you do. And Fauci basically saying it without saying it. It's like, no, we need data. We rely on data, not hunches. Now, he didn't say that, but that's what he was getting to. And that was around the time where Trump was talking about replacing Fauci. Just because the one man in your corner who's smart enough to understand or handle this pandemic, you're thinking about getting rid of because he inferred that your hunch about something that needs data might be incorrect. Can you get more fragile than that? Can you? I don't think you can. I don't think you can. He is a dangerous president. There's... Moving on.
Anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the tests. And the tests are beautiful. And the tests are all perfect. Like the letter was perfect. The transcription was perfect.
U.S. has sent out 900,000 tests this week, with 200,000 more set to be shipped tomorrow, short of the 1.5 million he initially... An investigation by The Atlantic found only about 1,900 people have been tested for the virus in the U.S., even the government's own top doctors critical.
I'm not happy about the lack of the appropriate number of test kits, that's for sure.
I haven't touched my face in weeks. In weeks. Mr. President, I miss it.
This photo taken 2 days before.
There are now over 400 positive cases.
Across the world, there are now more than 105,000 cases of the virus in at least 95 countries, with more than 3,500 deaths.
A president who tells us that he is a great genius. He knows everything about the coronavirus. Our administration will believe in science.
At least 4 Republican lawmakers, Ted Cruz, Matt Gaetz, Paul Gosar, and Doug Collins, now choosing to self-quarantine. after unknowingly interacting with an infected person at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Maryland last month.
The Italian government tonight put the entire country on lockdown. All Italy now a zona rossa.
All right, so beautiful tests, beautiful letters, beautiful transcript. He never misses an opportunity to like double down on something that he was criticized on before. Like I said, master manipulator. He's a funny guy. But yeah, you hear that 1,900 people were tested at that point. Now this is probably like early March, I believe, when that video was made. And yeah, 1,900 people. Meanwhile, South Korea had like, what, 100,000 people tested prior to that, before that. So yeah, then that leads to Fauci's comments about he's like, nah, this isn't enough. I mean, that's the man who would have the best opinion on whether or not it's enough, and he's saying it's not enough. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't imagine having that man's job where his whole career he was a scientist, an intellectual, somebody who worked off of, like I said, data and facts, and now he's representing somebody who is the opposite of that, the epitome of denial and stupidity. It's fascinating to watch Fauci avoid melting down from stress. And then yeah, four Republican lawmakers tested. Ted Cruz, fuck Ted Cruz. CPAC, yeah, where all the meatheads get together and talk about how they care about abortion and the sanctity of life, despite the fact that they pass legislature that completely goes against their ideology. Yeah, so you're going to probably see a lot more Republicans catching it, I'd imagine, because it's a cult and they all follow Trump. And, you know, Trump to this day still won't wear a mask. He's lied about being tested. So yeah, his followers aren't going to take it seriously. So they probably will be impacted a little bit harder than the rest of us. I haven't seen any numbers on that, though. I don't think they've done that aspect of statistics to see whether or not Republicans versus Democrats, who catches it more. But just thinking logically, I would assume Republicans are probably at a higher risk just because of their lack of logic and common sense, you know. And then yeah, Italy going into major lockdown. They were the first because they had the biggest early on spike in cases and deaths. And as you've seen so far, the numbers just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. At first it was 10 deaths in Italy. Now the last the video showed was what, 400 or 1,000. Yeah, it's progressing pretty rapidly at this point, and it's, as you know, about to get a lot worse. Yeah, Bernie Sanders, man, it's sad. It's sad that he didn't get the nomination. When you listen to him speak, he's just so, you know, honest and direct, and he never bullshits. He doesn't ever beat around the bush and calling him incompetent. I mean, the man just, he knows what's up. He's a wise old dude, and yeah, I was sad to see him go. But yeah, he's still very much out there fighting, trying to expose the injustices, and like especially with George Floyd, he's out there and he's giving speeches and stuff. So he's always going to be prevalent. But yeah, he was pretty vocal during the height of the pandemic, the first wave anyway, that we've already seen. Even though the wave is not over, people need to know that. The wave ends when 0 people contract the virus, like the flu. Like it's seasonal. It ends. The wave ends. And we are not even out of the first wave yet, when we've already reopened. And now we have massive countrywide protests. So I don't even think we'll see the end of the first wave before the unofficial, what people will call the second wave, starts to spike up. It's going to get bad here very soon, and very quickly, especially once these protests resolve themselves.
study finds that for those who are infected, roughly half will develop symptoms in about 5 days. And by 12 days, just about everyone infected will have symptoms. That's why anyone under quarantine needs to take that 14-day time period seriously.
In Italy, the death toll rising over 1,000.
New York State now has more than 400 confirmed cases.
I am officially declaring a national emergency. Two very big words. This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic.
If I get corona, I get corona. At the end of the day, I'm not going to let it stop me from partying.
Now reaching every state, infecting thousands and killing more than 100 nationwide.
Alarming spring break images from Texas to Clearwater Beach, Florida.
I view it as in a sense, a wartime president. I mean, that's what we're fighting. I mean, it's a very tough situation. It's the invisible enemy. That's always the toughest enemy, the invisible enemy, but we're going to defeat the invisible enemy.
We're non-symptomatic professional athletes getting tests while others are waiting in line and can't get them. Do the well-connected go to the front of the line?
Well, you'd have to ask them that question. I mean, I've read. No, I wouldn't say so, but perhaps that's been the story of life.
All right, even more to unpack. So let's see, they're talking about symptoms. 14-day symptoms, where they want you to self-quarantine for 14 days. I had a conversation recently with my uncle about this, and he said something that made a lot of sense. And I had heard previously that they don't know how much of the coronavirus it takes for you to officially get infected with the coronavirus. So say you're out and about and you get exposed and you get, hypothetically, a couple molecules, 100 molecules of the coronavirus. Then you go home and you self-quarantine for 14 days and you isolate yourself in a controlled environment where the door is shut, the ventilation, it's a closed circuit environment where you're basically breathing the same air over and over and over, which gives those couple hundred molecules a chance to procreate and become more involved and concentrated in the air. So you go home with 100 molecules in your body, and over the course of those 14 days it becomes prevalent enough for you to actually become infected. And there were some studies to suggest that the act of self-quarantining actually made people get sick, which is an interesting prospect to think about, because that was considered one of the most effective ways to avoid getting sick. So everyone's learning a lot about this as it goes on. But Trump declaring it a national emergency, that's kind of funny, considering that it's a problem that's going to go away on its own, magically, and we got it contained and everything's fine. Believe me, believe me, believe me, believe me, believe me. Yeah, and then he had the balls to say that I called it a pandemic before anyone else was calling it a pandemic. You called it a hoax when no one else was calling it a hoax. I mean, that's like the purest example of how that man can fucking lie through his teeth. I mean, it's just, it's so beautiful. Like his letter in the tests. Yeah, and then crowds did coronavirus ain't gonna stop me from partying. Like, dude, you're a dumbass. Do you like your grandparents? Do you love your grandparents? Do you have family members with pre-existing conditions? Like, you're dumb. You don't know anything about this virus. Even top scientists hardly know anything about this virus. And you're just going to assume that you're going to be okay, let alone your family, who you will bring it back to. And you're just going to assume, oh, I'm fine. I want to get drunk. A few moments of partying is not worth, from what I understand, to be a horrible, horrible sickness to get, where it feels like your bones are breaking and you're contorted in pain and you're stuck to a bed and you can't breathe. It feels like you're drowning constantly. I mean, people are underestimating the seriousness of what this illness does to you. And that's bad. That's bad. Yeah, and a wartime president. Oh, that's cute. Oh, that's cute. Mr. Bone Spurs is a wartime president. That is cute, you draft dodging coward. Like, come on, man. the hardest enemy is the invisible enemy. How many invisible enemies have we had? I mean, is he talking about his own psychosis? Yeah, I get what he's saying. You know, coronavirus it's microscopic and it's invisible. You can't see it. Blah blah blah. But come on, a wartime president, dude. Like you couldn't fight yourself out of a wet paper bag, but you're a wartime president. Man, you jump on that wagon as soon as you saw an opportunity. I mean, it's all about inflating your ego, and it's sad and it's pathetic, you know. But yeah, and then what's his name? That reporter that I like, the one who always gives Trump shit, asks him, "Are well-connected people getting tested before poor people?" Yeah, I heard of a report where a woman was charged thousands of dollars for getting coronavirus treatment. Yeah, wealthy people, of course, are moving to the front of the lines. I mean, I know it's kind of a dumb question, but it needs to be asked because most people probably just assume wealthy people are getting tests. You could just go out. Money will buy you anything, including a coronavirus test. Yeah, they definitely are. And not, like I said before, I'm not much into controversy, but I do find it peculiar that every time Trump is out and about, he does not have a mask, and yet he has not contracted the virus. It kind of makes me think that maybe there is a cure for it, and the wealthy or the elite have access to it, and we do not. But that's getting pretty far into that spectrum of it being like created as a weapon, which it's not. It's not, you know. There's very little evidence to suggest, no evidence to suggest it was a weapon. It was just being studied in a lab that was designed to study viruses. And, you know, it got out. It was right next to a food market, so an employee at that lab, you know, didn't follow every protocol, or there was a little tear in his little suit, and he went and bought some fish or something, and then boom, it spreads. I mean, that's how these things happen. It's not always nefarious. I mean, there's so little trust in our government that we like to jump to these conclusions, but that's not always the case. Quite often, it's not the case.